Hi, and welcome to Code Tutorials. Today we'll take a look at how you can display your blog posts using the blog list widget from our Qi Addons for Elementor plugin. Right now, we're looking at some examples of this widget's use. Here you can see the different possibilities you have for showing your blog posts when you're not limited to the blog archive page. The blog list widget comes with several different customization and layout options, which you can combine in a multitude of ways. You can create blog displays with images and without, boxed or spread full width, set a colorful background and make them match their page surroundings. You can also pick how many posts will be shown per page, as well as which part of the post you want to highlight, the featured image by making it larger, the author by showing their name and image, the title by removing the distractions such as the excerpt. You can do all this and more. But let's dive into specifics. We are going to see how this widget works and what you need to know to use it. Head over to the back end, and in the Elementor sidebar, search for blog list. The one we need is on the left. The one on the right is part of the theme I'm using and not part of the Qi Addons for Elementor plugin. Now drag this over to the page. This is what the widget looks like by default. We have 3 items with a certain preset layout. However, the fact we can see this means that there were blog posts for displaying. In my case, I created these 3 posts for this video, so I'd have something to show you. You need to create the posts that will populate your list before you can start in on the list itself. Speaking of the list, let's see what options we have for it. The first is List Appearance. It's set to Gallery by default, and that gets us this look we can see on the right. However, you can switch this to Masonry and it will display the posts arrayed by the featured images, so you won't have the straight line of the gallery. In my case, since I planned on using a gallery list appearance, I uploaded images with the same dimensions, so when I switch to Masonry, my list looks virtually the same. But as I said, I plan on using the gallery list appearance anyway, and the images I picked are perfectly suited for that. Our next option is Image Proportions, where we can pick how we want our images to be displayed, as thumbnails, as portraits, as squares, and so on. For my design, I want to keep the images original. Then we can set the number of columns. You can pick anything from 1 to 8. Given that I made 3 posts for this tutorial, I want to keep this set to 3. Below that, we have Columns Responsive. This option lets you decide how many columns will be shown on a range of different screen widths. I'm going to pick Custom so I can decide for each particular range. Now, we don't have an option for the largest screens, the ones that are 1920 by 1100 pixels, because the number of columns we'll be using on them is determined by the number of columns option we adjusted earlier. So, the first screen size here is for laptops. And you'd use this drop-down to pick the number of columns you want to show. I'm going to stick with 3 because this is still a pretty large screen size, and I'll leave the same number of columns for Mac screens. But then, for landscape orientation on tablets, I'll set 1, and I'll do the same for the rest of the options. There. Next, we have the Space Between Items option, which you can adjust using this slider. As I move it, you can see the space increase, here, between the different blog items. I think this looks good, so I'll leave it set to 27 pixels. Then we have the Enable Pagination option. I'll switch it to Yes. And since my list has only 3 posts and they are all shown, I need to make separate adjustments in the next section for the pagination to become visible. So, in the Query section, I need to adjust the Posts per Page option. Right now it's set to 9, which means that posts from 10 and upward will be shown on subsequent pages, and visitors will be able to go to those pages using the pagination. However, given my modest number of posts, I'll set 2 here so we can see how the pagination will look. And there, we can see the number of pages I have. Both day and the navigation arrow are clickable. Now this is a pretty simple look, and if you like, you can style the pagination. To do that, you need to go to the Style tab, and in this topmost section, Pagination Style, we have some handy options. The first one is Pagination Typography. Here you can change things like the font family for the pagination. You can scroll through the list or search for the font if you know its name. And you can change the font size too, like so. The weight option allows you to choose from a range of values to set your font weight. Then we have the text transform option, which we can use to make our text, for example, uppercase. And there's also the style option if you'd like to turn your pagination, say, italic. Following that, the decoration option lets us add a line over, under, or through the pagination numbers. And then we can increase the height of the line containing the pagination. Or we can use letter spacing to create more space between the numbers. And that's it for the pagination typography settings. Then we have these switches with normal and active hover, which reveal different settings for the pagination. Under normal, meaning normal list display, we can set the pagination color. It has this standard color picker, so you can easily set whichever color you like, as you can see. Or you can clear this to restore the default setting. There is also the background color option, and that would look something like this, depending on which shade you chose. Then, if we switch to the settings for the active and hover display, we have another color option. With this one, the color you pick will only be visible on the number of the list page that you're on or one that you're hovering over. And the same principle applies to the background color. Anything you set will be visible on the active pagination number or one you're hovering over. Alright, below this we have the fields for picking the pagination arrows, the previous and the next. I'm going to change the arrow for next as that's the one that's visible right now. And for that I'll use the icon library and set this arrow, insert. And there it is. Right below this we can adjust the pagination arrow size if you're not happy with the default one. Okay, and after this we have the pagination item border radius. To explain this, as well as the few other options to follow, I'll first set the background color, say this one. Then I'll increase the pagination item width. As you can see, the background color shows how the space stretches. And I'll also increase the pagination item height. I'll make them the same. There. Now the space holding the numbers and arrows is square. Given all of that, I can return to the pagination item border radius option to set a radius for this space. And when I start to increase, we can see how the radius, the curving of the corners, grows. And if you increase it enough, the shape can become circular, as we can see thanks to the background color. Okay. Our next option is for setting the space between pagination items. It's very straightforward. By increasing the value here, you increase the space between the pagination items. And the pagination margin top helps us increase the space between the pagination and the rest of the blog list. Like so. Alright, those were our pagination style settings. Given that I'm not planning on keeping the pagination, I'll just go back to the Content tab where we left off and disable it. There. And I'll also return to the query section where I'll adjust the posts per page option. I set 2 here so the pagination would show, but since I don't need it now, I'll put 3 instead. And there, my blog list has nicely distributed posts across its available width. Now, carrying on with the options here, we can pick what criterion will be used for ordering the posts in this list. By default, it's set to date. But you can replace that with any of these options, such as post ID or title. For myself, I'll leave it set to date. Then we can pick the order in which the posts will be displayed. You can choose between the default, descending, or switch it to ascending. And below this, we have the additional parameters. Using this option, we can, in a way, filter the posts that will be shown on the list. The additional parameters allow us to choose whether we'll only show posts with certain IDs or certain taxonomy slugs or from certain authors. Although I only have 3 posts and they're all shown here, I'll pick taxonomy slugs so I can show you the principle behind the additional parameters option. Now I can pick which taxonomy I want to use, a category or a tag. I'll use category. And then in the field underneath, I can type in the slug to specify the exact category I want to show. Since all my posts belong to the lifestyle category, that's what I'm using. Finally, the taxonomy IDs option lets us set which posts we want in our list by adding their IDs here. Mind you, those posts need to belong to the category you already set or they won't be shown. As I said, this is almost like filtering the list view. You can find a post's ID by looking at its URL. I'll open this one to show you. If we look at the URL here, this number is the post ID. So you can go through the posts you want to show, copy their IDs, and then go to the blog list element and list them out in the taxonomy IDs field. And make sure to separate each ID with a comma. Alright. After that, we have the layout section. And you might find the first option here the most interesting. Using the item layout, we can decide which of the possible looks we want to use for the blog singles in the list. The default one, the one we see on the right, is boxed. But there are also others we can switch to, such as date boxed, which gets us this look. Then there's info on image, which is more compact as it places the text over the image. And we have minimal, so this one is unfussy and text focused. Other than that, there's also side image, which looks like this, but keep in mind that with 3 items in a row it's a bit squashed and that this layout would look much better when items have room to stretch out. And finally we have the standard setting, which looks like this. The image is here, but there's also a lot of text. For my planned design, I'll be using date boxed. Once that's sorted, you can decide on the title tag that you want to use. That's for our post's titles, this text. You can pick any of these tags. I'll use H3. The titles are a bit bigger now. Then we can choose whether we want to show the excerpt. The excerpts are this text here. The default setting has them showing, but you can switch this to no, and then your blog list will look like this. I'll switch it back on. And in the field below, you can set the excerpt length. The default value is 180 characters, but I'll set 100 here just to show you. There. The text is noticeably shorter now. I'll clear this so the default value gets restored. After that, we have the center content option. By default, the content is aligned to the left, but you can set this to yes and then everything in the blog list will be centered. I'll put this back. The Show Media option is enabled by default and lets us display the post's featured images. If we switch this to no, then the images disappear. Alright. We also have this option, Show Info Icons, where we can enable the info icons, and they would show the post's category and author with accompanying icons. By default, we can see this information but without the icons. Then there's the option to show the date. It's enabled already, but if I switch it to no, then the date in the corner disappears. I plan on using mine, so I'll put it back. After that, we have the Show Category option. It's enabled by default, there's my category, but you can switch it off and then it will simply disappear from view. I'll restore mine. Then we have the Show Author option. Just like with the category, we can stop it from showing in the list. This one I'm going to leave disabled. And the last of these options is the Show button. That's the Read More button here. And you can set this to no to stop it from appearing in the list. If you disable the button, the posts can still be opened by clicking on their title or featured image. Still, I want to keep mine on. This has the additional benefit of letting us see the options in the section underneath, the one for the Read More button. The first option in here is for changing the button text. If you don't enter anything, the button will automatically say Read More. But if you want something different, you can simply type in, like I am, something new. There. And if you're using a button, you can choose its layout. By default, the one we have is filled. The alternatives are outlined, which looks like this, and textual, which looks like this. That's the one I'll be keeping. With the textual button, you get this option to enable a button text underline. Switching it to yes makes this line appear under the button. And that was the Read More button section. Continuing, we have this section for adding an icon to that button. For the icon itself, you can choose one from the icon library or upload an SVG. I'll do the latter. and use this icon I already uploaded to my media library and insert media. Then we have the option to pick if the icon will stay to the right of the button text or if we want to switch it to the left. I'll keep mine on the right. And the last section in the Content tab is for the developer tools. When we open them, there's just one option here. Switching its setting to yes will get it to display the widget in the form of a standard WordPress shortcode, which we can easily copy for use elsewhere on our site. Okay, now we can move on to the Style tab. And the topmost section here is the pagination style. It's empty now because I disabled the pagination, but that doesn't have to bother us as we already looked at all the options for styling it. So let's move down to the Style section. The first option in here is for changing the title color. You can pick and set any color you like easily. Then we have the title hover color, which works the same way, only the color becomes visible on hover. And after that, there's the title typography. It has all the same settings we saw with the pagination typography option earlier, so there shouldn't be any need to go over it again. Okay, next we have the title hover underline. If we enable this, then hovering over the title will cause this animated line to appear. Okay, these are the title style options, and after this we have something similar for the excerpt style, starting with the excerpt color. It has this same user-friendly color picker. And there's the excerpt typography. Again, all the same options are here. Then we have a few options for styling the information. In my case, there's only the category left. The first option is for changing the color. And we can see that the category name shows the new setting. I have a specific shade in mind, so I'll type in a hex code to get it. There, plain black. Next, we can change the hover color for the information. Let me show you. And it can look something like this. Then we have another typography option, this one for the information text. We know the settings, so I'll just use it to set the font size to 16 pixels and increase the weight to 500. Okay, that's it. The next option is the image hover, meaning the effect you get by hovering over an image. By default, it's set to zoom in, as you can see, and the zoom origin is set to center. You can change that and select top, so you get this, or bottom, so it's like this, then left, like this, and finally right, which looks like this. Now all of these, let me put this back, can be used if you pick zoom as the image hover setting. And there's zoom in, but there's also zoom out, which looks like this. However, there are other settings too. Move is one, and it looks like this. None is the other. With this one, you have no change on hover. I'll use the original setting, zoom in. Okay. After this, we have the overlay color option. With it, you can set a color, give it a degree of transparency, and there. The images are tinted with your chosen shade. Alongside this, there's the overlay hover color. It works the same, only the color becomes visible when you hover over the images. And you can set a degree of transparency to keep the images visible. Alright, that's it for the style section. The next one in line is the layout spacing style. In here, we can adjust things like the post info margin bottom. Basically, we can use this to add more space under the information text here. I'll set 7 pixels for it. Then we can adjust the title margin bottom. That's the space here between the title and the excerpt. I'll set 15 pixels for that one. Then there's the image margin bottom option. If you want to adjust the space dividing the image from the text content. For that one, I'll put 33 pixels. And finally, we have the text margin bottom option for adding space under the excerpt. I'll set, so that's this space here, I'll set 31 pixels. Okay, with that we can move on to the Read More button style section. So all these options are for styling this button saying, in my case, keep reading. The first thing we can adjust is the typography settings. I won't bore you with the particulars as we already covered this. I'll just increase the font size to 17 pixels and we can move on. And here we have these switches, normal and hover. Each reveals different options. Under Normal, we have the text color, so we can easily change the color of the button text. I'll set a very dark gray for this. Okay. Then there's the background color, which won't work for me as the button layout I'm using is textual and it has no background, unlike the filled and outlined layouts. And the same goes for the border color and all of these border settings. Now let's switch over to the hover settings. The first thing in here is the text hover color. With it, we can change the color of the button text when it's hovered over. However, the rest of these options are for the border. As I don't have the button layout that allows me to use these, I'll just carry on. And this brings us to the Read More Button Icon Style section. If, like me, you added an icon to your button, this is where you can adjust it. Starting with its size. You can use the slider to increase the icon size, or you can type in a value. I'll set 6 pixels. Below this, we have another set of normal and hover switches. Under normal, we can change the icon color. It works like setting any other color. And under hover, we have the move icon option. This lets us pick the animation the icon will have when hovered over. Right now, it's set to horizontal short, so we get this effect. However, you can switch that to horizontal, and then you get this look. Or you can pick vertical, which looks like this. And there's also diagonal with this effect. And finally, you can set this to none to keep the icon stationary on hover. For my button, I'll keep the horizontal short animation. Alright. After this, we have the icon margin option. If I start to increase the values, we can see how the icon gets separated from the text. Since I don't need the same amount of space on all sides, I'll delink the fields, which will let me adjust each side separately. I'll put 3 pixels at the top and 10 pixels on the left to reposition it. That's all. I'm happy with this. The section underneath this one is for the Read More button inner border style. When we open it, we can see it's empty. This is because I'm using the textual button layout and that doesn't allow for the addition of an inner border. So this section is empty because I don't need to change a button type I'm not actively using. So moving on to the Read More button underline style section. I have options I can use here because I enabled the button text underline. And now I can customize it. For one, I can change the underline color. There's this familiar color picker to help us do that. Then we can adjust the underline width. You can determine how long the line will be if you don't want it to be as long as the button text. And you can use the underline thickness to set how thick the line will be. Then, with all of that done, you can set the underline alignment. For this one, your underline needs to be shorter than the button text. Then, if you switch the alignment from left to right, the line moves to the right side of the button text. And if I switch it to center, then the line is centered under the text. Okay, I'll put this back now and restore the width, as well as the thickness. Now, I skipped one option, and that is the underline offset. This is for adjusting the amount of space between the underline and the button text. The higher the value you set, the closer the line will be. I'm going to leave this set to 6 pixels. I think it looks nice. Okay, now let's take a look at the settings under hover. The first one is the underline hover color. So if you set a color here, it will be visible only on hover and only briefly until you adjust the underline hover width. And adjusting the width option here lets us shorten or lengthen the line so the changed length can be seen on hover. The final option we have under the hover settings is the Enable Hover Underline Draw. It creates a slight animated effect that makes it seem like the underline is being drawn when you hover over it. So if you enable it, you'll get this. The line moves, but it fills back up. Okay, I'll turn it off. It's not part of my planned design. Right. Our next section, Content Style, is going to be blank for me. The options here become available if you opt to use specific layouts for your blog list items. I'll show you how that looks once we get through everything else. And given that we only have date style left, that will be soon. In date style, we have the options for adjusting the date color. So for the date, you'll want to be looking at this box here. And if I change the color, there, the date is now in red. Then we can change the date hover color, and it will be visible only when you hover over a single. And after that, there's the date typography. And in here, I just want to change the font size to 15 pixels. Okay, then we have the background color option. That's for the box holding the date. I'll set a dark gray background here. Then we have the date padding option. So with this, we can adjust the space around the date itself and thereby change the size of its container. And I want to make different settings to different sides, so I'll delink the fields and set 9 pixels at the top, 16 on the right, 9 at the bottom, and 16 on the left. And since I'm done, I'll hit update. With this, I completed my planned design for the blog list. I made the adjustments I wanted to, and I'm happy with the finished look. But this tutorial is not done yet. I promised to show you the content style options. So, as I mentioned, to use these you need to have a specific item layout. One of the possible ones to use is the boxed item layout. Okay, then when I go back to the Style tab and open the Content Style section, we have some options here. One is for setting the content background color, like so. The boxes containing the text get a new color. And we can also set an item shadow. It appears right away when we click on the option. And there are adjustments you can make to the shadow. Shift its horizontal alignment or its vertical alignment. Adjust the shadow blur and increase or decrease the spread of the shadowed area. Finally, you can switch its position from outside the box to inside it. And that's it. These are the content style options for the boxed item layout. But that's not the only layout that activates the options. We also have the minimal item layout that we can use to get these options. But for that, I also need to make a change and switch the number of columns to 1. There. Now, going back to the Style tab and the Content Style section, we have slightly different options. There's the border color, which lets us change the color of this line dividing the individual posts. Then we have the border top thickness to adjust how thick the dividing line will be. And finally, we have the border top style where we can pick different looks for the line. We have solid, which is the default one. Then there's dashed, and lastly dotted. Okay, that was the second item layout and the content style options you get for it. Since we covered that, I'm going to restore the settings, columns first, and then the layout that I wanted to use for my blog list design. And there it is, update. And this is my finished blog list. To finish up this tutorial, we can take one last look at the page with examples of different blog list designs achievable with this widget. With all the explanations in this tutorial and having learned which options you have in the back end, as well as how to use them, you should now be able to make your own blog list elements easily. You can take the examples you see here and copy them for your site, or simply use them as inspiration. Of course, you can just as easily create something unique by making different combinations of settings. How you decide to use and stylize this widget is entirely up to you. Hopefully you found this tutorial helpful and are on your way to making blog post displays with the Qi Addons for Elementor plugin and its blog list widget. If you have any questions, comments or suggestions, please drop us a line in the comments below. Also, make sure to subscribe to our channel and be the first to learn about new theme guides and tutorials. Thanks for watching.